fuels. Please welcome Alexa. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Amy and Scott. Really feel for you guys. What a mess. And thank you to Gil. Wish we had you on our side for our case. My name is Alexa Dawson. I'm a Potawatomi Anishinaabe I'm a Potawatomi woman, and that's a big part of my motivation to resist the well that I'm going to talk about. I did grow up in Oklahoma. My family still lives in and around Chandler, Oklahoma. And if you don't know where that is, I'm not surprised, but it's not very far away from Sparks and Prague. And you might have heard, if you've been following the Oklahoma earthquakes, that those are the two places where the epicenters are most likely to occur. Of course, there is oil activity all over Oklahoma. My grandfather was a oil well patcher, I'm not really sure, and a fisherman, a tool fisherman. I spent my whole life, looking up to this man, and he was very active in oil and gas. My father also worked in oil and gas. My grandma affectionately referred to our family as oil field trash. So that was sort of the way that I was raised. It was just a given. It was just a part of life. Oil and gas is just, that's how Oklahoma gets by. Very proud of it. And I was not raised in a traditional manner concerning my heritage. Like many others, I'm trying to pick up the pieces that were left along the path, as they say when they talk about the seventh fire. I aspire to be, a part of this awakening, a part of this change in perspective that takes a look at the natural world and acknowledges it as just as important as economic matters. Without water, there is no life. You can't eat money, all of those things that we've heard a lot about recently. And like many others, I was really captivated and inspired by Standing Rock, and by everyone who gathered there, and the community that sprung up there, and the resistance that happened there, and I wanted to be a part of something like that, I was unable to go, but I think, those of you who did go. Something I learned kind of following some of the people on social media that I was following that were a very central part of what was going on up there is that their activism didn't start out there in that camp. The activism started in the courtroom, and it happened for a long time. For years they resisted before it came down to actually occupying that treaty land and saying we're not going anywhere. And so I took a tip from that and kind of put that in my back pocket. And then one day I was on my social media, and I was sent a message that was sort of a picture of a public notice that was in the Morris County Republican. And this was my first exposure to this idea that when an oil and gas company applies for a permit, that there's a notice put in the paper. And as a citizen, you have the right to protest that application. And I had no idea this was possible, and I was kind of like, oh great, let's just stop this saltwater injection well. This will be great. And then I'll have my water protector badge, and I'll feel like I did something. And I'm just like, we're just gonna write some letters, we're just gonna get rid of this thing. We don't need injection wells in the Flint Hills, and I haven't really talked so much about the Flint Hills, but I want to say a little bit about that. We have the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve right there in Chase County. How many of you have been there? If you haven't, please come see us, come visit. It's a beautiful, beautiful country and a precious ecosystem, only about 4% remaining of the Tallgrass Prairie. And it's worth caring for, it's worth protecting. So this application was not in Chase County, but Morris County, which is the county just north of us where Council Grove is the seat. The area where the injection well was being applied for is west of Council Grove, and it's in an area called Diamond Springs. Diamond Springs is on the Santa Fe Trail, and so this area was a stop along the Santa Fe Trail for travelers to come and water horses, get water for themselves. It's a very special place. I've been there a couple of times with friends and said prayers and just enjoyed the beauty of the area. It's the headwaters for Diamond Creek, which flows into the Cottonwood River. And so being a musician and having a lot of social media followers, when I shared this little picture, I said, hey guys, all we gotta do is write a letter to the KCC. What is that? I don't know. It's some people, they'll care. Sorry. All we have to do is protest this and tell them why it's a bad idea. This is, headwaters for an important stream that runs into this important river, and we're just going to write these letters. And you saw his map earlier, and if you can recall that Humboldt fault zone, this is right in that area. So that spread through social media. We had over 30 letters written to the Kansas Corporation Commission protesting this injection well in the beautiful Flint Hills. We were able to get 5 of those people actually on the docket, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that was such a difficult task. So when you write a letter to the Kansas Corporation Commission, and this is going to get a little confusing, and I don't even understand all of it, so I'm just going to try to explain it the best I can. The regulations surrounding protests are frankly absurd. They're also opaque. I mean, they don't make a lot of sense, and I'll give you an example. More than 10 people who emailed or wrote a protest letter to the Kansas Corporation Commission about an enhanced oil recovery well in Greenwood County that my friends are working very hard, thank you guys, to stand up to. This included West Jackson incidentally, but they received an email telling them their protest had been rejected. And it did not include an explanation, but it did include a link to the regulations surrounding protests. So that also included an amended order authorizing the use of electronic filing. It even encouraged you to use electronic filing, and it set aside the prior requirements for multiple copies of paperwork. Protest letters were not exempted in any way in this amendment. So when you e-file a protest letter via the web interface, you're required to enter a docket number. A docket number does not exist until the protest has been accepted. The hearing has to be scheduled for there to be a docket number. So this catch-22, we did ask Renee Stuckey, who probably some of you have been on the phone with, but a nice guy. He has been really patient with me. But he acknowledged that it's impossible to file a protest electronically, even though this amendment exists. The rejection letter does not state that you can't do that, and it even encourages e-filing. So you e-file, you get a rejection letter encouraging you to e-file. If you manage to get a protest letter approved in the short time allowed, either by the tangled e-file process or just writing a paper letter, which doesn't always work. I wrote a handwritten letter and did my e-file submission for the Greenwood County well, and I still didn't even end up getting a letter about the pre-hearing call. I should have just called and said, hey, I wrote a letter. But if you do manage to get your letter approved, your next hurdle is to submit another letter. And this letter is asking for a hearing, even though you told them that you want a hearing. The next thing you need to do is write a letter telling them that you want a hearing. And you have 10 days to do that. So, once again, just more red tape. Next, you get the paperwork about the pre-hearing phone call. It's conveniently scheduled during business hours. And if you can't call in at the scheduled time, you are pushed off the docket. Even though the purpose of the pre-hearing call is to set a schedule for the hearing and the pre-filed testimony, the protestants are sometimes treated to demands by the oil company lawyers, wanting to know what kind of evidence you'll submit, what testimony you'll present, how many witnesses you'll call, and whether you can consolidate with the other protestants. You don't have to respond to any of this, but they will push you to do so. Sometimes you also get treated to fits of irritation by the oil company's lawyer. Cindy told me that on the Greenwood call, the lawyer admonished you that they were not playing games. Is that right, Susan? If you end up on one of these calls, resist the temptation to respond to any of this. I mean, that's not what the call is for, but they will use intimidation tactics during that call. If you do get a hearing on the application, this hearing is not listening to you. This hearing is just an opportunity for lawyers to cross-examine the witnesses on their pre-filed testimony. So the way this works is, the protestants have until, or the company has until this date, the protestants have until this date, then there's a rebuttal period. So everything that's going to be talked about at the hearing has basically already been submitted in paperwork to the Kansas Corporation Commission. They've reviewed it, and now we're just cross-examining witnesses. The testimony that is submitted has to be cross-examined. So the U.S. Geological Survey that Gil talked about, and also a Kansas Geological Survey, we were able to submit it as administrative note. But the authors, we couldn't pay to hire them to be there to be cross-examined, so that even though the science is available to the Kansas Corporation Commission, they do not have to pay any attention to it. They can deny science because they are not able to cross-examine the people who actually wrote the study. The petrogeologist that was hired by Quail Oil and Gas, which was the company that we were protesting, was able to, with a straight face, look at the commissioners and the lawyer for Kansas Corporation Commission and say that this well would absolutely not cause an induced earthquake. I don't know how he sleeps at night, but the science is there. But the petrogeologist can just come into this hearing and say, not going to happen. And the Corporation Commission says, oh, well, that's good enough. Dr. James Aber was kind enough to pro bono speak for us, and he was, told as best as he could, that this is a fault-ridden zone, that this is a place where there are lots of historic activity, which was completely denied by the petrogeologist. So another thing that I kind of wanted to mention is just that, as I talked about earlier, when I first heard about this, this application and this opportunity to fight it, I thought, we don't need any injection wells in Chase County, and I had this really idealistic thing about how we were going to keep them out of Chase County, keep them out of the Flint Hills. And then about April or May, I was interviewed by a journalist who was with the Topeka Capital Journal at the time. And right in the middle of the interview, she says, can I show you something? And I said, okay. And she pulls up on her laptop, she pulls up a map that she had put together of all of the existing wastewater injection wells. And I'm like, oh, Okay, yeah, we have a lot. We already have a lot in Chase County. We have a lot in the Flint Hills. And these are both gravity fed and pressurized, and there's some, some differences, I guess, with risk. But she said, well, does it make you feel better to know that there's already injection wells operating? And I said, no. It doesn't make me feel any better at all. It's kind of like you can avoid a pothole or two in the road, but once the whole thing is pitted, there's no getting around it. The risk is increasing. There's no way that this is okay. Being from Oklahoma and seeing, the troubles that they've had there, I don't want to have that in my home. I don't want to have that in the Flint Hills or on the Tallgrass Prairie at all. So I guess in short, it's been, as a citizen, it's been a real experience to go through this. It's not my preferred comfort zone, being in legal battles and things like that, but one of the good things that came out of it is our group called the Flint Hills Stewards, and our mission is to be faithful stewards of the Flint Hills and preserve the beauty and diversity of the ecosystem for generations to come. And we want to do that by mobilizing and encouraging individuals to act as stewards of their territories. And I think that that's really important. I think for a long time, I know me personally, I sort of thought about the EPA and these other regulatory institutions as protecting us. And I have been completely freed of that illusion over the past year. That's not what they're there for. They're there for the illusion of protection. And so I think that it's important to encourage, especially our conservative neighbors, we don't want the big brother in our backyard. Let's take care of it ourselves. And that's kind of what we're trying to do in Chase County and the Flint Hills. And we want to educate people. I think education is a key. Landowners sometimes just don't really go into. I'm thankful for landowners like you guys who care and who want to do something about it. Sadly, in our beautiful Tallgrass Prairie, that there have been landowners who have allowed wells to leak and create terrible pits of stink that cows will die getting into these pastures, and they just try to keep it fenced off. Well, fowl, rodents, all of our jackrabbits and our every other thing that needs water is going to go to that water, and I mean, it's just not. It's unconscionable to me, but I hope for more education with our landowners in that area, and just to try to encourage them to be responsible and to not just kind of ignore and go with the status quo on just letting the oil companies do whatever they want because they sign the check, I don't think I have anything more, but thanks very much. I did this on super short notice. KJ Guthrie was supposed to be here with you today. She and Cindy Hodel have been the real deal makers, and Cindy Hodel especially, making sure that we had the best case possible to go to the KCC with. I'm just sort of more the cheerleader, so if you meet Cindy or KJ, thank them too. Thanks so much.
Okay, we're still collecting cards, yep. If all the speakers could come to the front here. All right, let's just start here, and we'll see who can answer what. This is a question for Amy. How do I find out if I have one of these oil/gas leases on my land?
My husband helped with that.
How do you find out if you have a lease on your land? This question kind of piggybacks on, if you're buying property, how do you figure this out? The process when you go to purchase land, you find the land you want, it's where you want to raise your family. You go to a title company and they research the land and they give you a big packet of stuff. And when you're looking through all that stuff, it gives you the history of who's owned the land, it gives you the history of the land completely, and in there you might find a piece of paper that says there has been an oil or gas lease on this property. So what do? You read it. These papers have on them a beginning date and an end date. So for example, there was an oil and gas lease signed by a dead farmer and a dead oil man back in 1905. This lease will be good for 5 years unless some things happen. Two main things. One is if it continues to produce oil, it will perpetually stay alive. And two, if it doesn't, the oil company is required to pay a fee to the bank to keep that lease rental valid. Now, when they are producing oil, the law allows for them to put the public on notice, we are producing oil on this lease, therefore it is continuing to exist. So when you go to buy the land, you see here is a lease, it started in 1905, it should have ended in 1910, so now I need to check the public record. Does the public record say that production has continued from 1905 to current? If they have been producing year after year after year, it is still current. If they don't produce, they then have to go to the bank and they can pay a fee to the bank, and that is also on public record. So when you're buying your land and you get your stack of stuff, you have to be able to research and trust the public record. The 100-year-old leases that became very popular when fracking became popular, the fracking is what made everybody go back at the old leases and try again for the oil with the new technology. If you think you have a 100-year-old lease, I would really look to see if the public record shows that there's been production or those payments to the bank, because we're finding that there is large gaps. But that's the basics of how do you figure out if somebody can show up on your land with a 100-year-old piece of paper and say, we're here to drill, which kind of happened to us. Or if you're buying a property, you really need to check that public record and be able to trust that that public record